Bonjour mes amis, je m'appelle Ian McCallum et bienvenue at Arms Oubliées. I'm Ian McCallum, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. And today, of course, we have the classic original French automatic rifle, except that this isn't really a French one, it's made in France, but this is the American model of 1918 Chauchat in 30-06 caliber. And this is, I think, a long-forgotten weapon of the U.S. First World War, the American Expeditionary Force, because when the U.S. entered World War I in April of 1917, we had a grand total of 1,453 machine guns as a national military, and that was split between 4 different types of guns. We did not have enough machine guns to equip anybody to go anywhere except basically into Mexico against Pancho Villa, which is what we were in the process of doing. And so the U.S. figures, well, we're gonna send troops over to France. We need something for them to have to actually shoot. Now, there were 4,000 Vickers guns on order from Colt, but none of them had arrived, and in fact, they wouldn't arrive until late that year, late 1917. So the U.S. starts looking around at other options, and in June of 1917, Springfield Armory tests the French Chauchat. Now, sadly, very sadly, the actual testing report from this experiment has been lost, but it appears that the result was at least favorable enough to encourage further interest, because the US, the next month in July, inquires about the possibility of redesigning the Chauchat to run 30-06 instead of the French 8mm Lebel. And that's actually done, and it's done fairly quickly. In August of 1917, Springfield runs another test where they're actually comparing the first 30-06 Chauchat against a prototype at that point of the BAR. Now you may be wondering about the BAR here. Let me just interject for a moment. The BAR at this point was still a project in development, and it wouldn't be ready for operational use until the middle of 1918, and it wasn't available in sufficient numbers to actually be fielded until like October of 1918. So the BAR only sees service at the very end of the First World War. And that really leaves the American troops kind of hanging out to dry in terms of automatic weapons. They've got their bolt-action rifles, we got Springfields, we got Enfield 1917s, but what about the machine guns? So Springfield has tested the 30-06 Chauchat against the BAR. Alas, this report is also lost. But the result, we know the result, which was the BAR is a better gun, but the BAR is also not available, and this is good enough that it will do. So the US goes ahead and arranges to purchase Hotchkiss 1914 heavy machine guns and French caliber Chauchats for the first 2 divisions that are being sent over from the American Expeditionary Force, and they're figuring that after that they'll be equipping troops with Vickers guns and 30-06 Chauchats until the BAR is ready, and then the BAR will substitute for the Chauchat. Now there's an interesting other story in here that apparently General Pershing turned down an opportunity for 20,000 Lewis guns, which would have been a fantastic solution, but that's a subject for a separate video. The US ends up placing an order for 25,000 30-06 caliber Chauchats, which are to be delivered by December of 1917, so a pretty quick turnaround. They're going to be manufactured by Gladiator, which was the bicycle factory where the French Chauchats were being manufactured. This gun, officially, you'll see it on the side here in a moment, it's the CSRG, and those initials stand for 3 of the designers, Chauchat, Sutter, and Ribichol, and the G is for Gladiator, the factory where they were manufactured. Anyway, deliveries actually begin in January of 1918, and these guns go into the field with American troops in France. So let's take a closer look at this, and I'll show you how it differs from the French Chauchat. These are not conversions. They are built from the ground up in 30-06, and we'll also talk about what went wrong with them. All right, I can't even quite get both of these things in frame here, but let's start with a quick overview comparison between the American Chauchat here and the French Chauchat. The first obvious thing that jumps out at you is the difference in magazines. The French Chauchat has this very distinctive half-moon magazine because it has to, because the 8mm Lebel cartridge has so much taper to it that when you stack 18 of them together, this is what you get. 30-06, however, does not have that sort of taper, and so the American magazine is a single stack, much simpler box magazine. You might think this would be a much better design, but it's kind of not really. So it's made out of very thin steel, holds 16 rounds. Personally, myself, I don't ever load these to more than 12, because when I start to get this thing full, I can see on mine the lips, the feed lips at the top start to bulge apart. This is not a very strong magazine. So 12, like officially 16 rounds, not as good of a mag as you think it ought to be. On the other hand, at least it doesn't have the giant mud holes, because that hole is solidly covered, almost completely covered, by the magazine well when it's in the gun. All right, next difference is the vertical front grip. Now, the vertical front grip is on the French Chauchat here basically out of necessity, because putting it way out here is just too far to be useful, and you got a magazine in the middle, and so this is kind of the only place you can put it, and it's awkward to use. The American one, actually, that vertical front grip is in just the right place. Like, it's great. And you can do that because it's a straight box magazine. And our third difference is in the buttstocks. The American gun has a buttstock that is shorter by like 1.5 inches. The mechanical elements of the gun are the exact same length, but you can clearly see the difference in buttstock length. And that is universal. Like, that's how all the American guns are. If we take a quick look at the markings, here on the American one we have CSRG. Like I said, the 3 designers and Gladiator. The American guns all have an A prefix on the serial number, so this is actually fairly late in production, 14,000 out of what would eventually be 18,000 delivered. Just for comparison's sake, there's the French markings, exact same thing, but it doesn't have a suffix or prefix on the serial number. This American one, by the way, is all matching, right down to the barrel and barrel shroud inside. We only have a couple serial numbers on the outside. The one here is on the back end of the tube. You can see again the A and 14446. Now there's also a difference in the sights, but it's a little trickier to describe. So this is our French gun here, but that rear sight plate is actually was added by the Finns, because a lot of French Chauchats that we have in the US, including this French one, went to Finland prior to the Winter War as military aid. So the Finns changed up the sights. Originally on the French gun you would have this rear notch as your rear sight. Now the American guns have a much, much deeper rear notch, and I can only assume that that was done to match the trajectory of the cartridge. If I lift that rear sight up here, you can see that even better. There's a metal plate that's been screwed onto the back here that allows you to adjust your windage, and this really deep V-notch in there. This is actually extremely difficult to get a sight picture on if you have, as far as I can tell, anything resembling a normal shaped face. All right, a couple other quick features here. The markings, the selector markings on the American guns are exactly the same as on the French one. So they're actually marked in French, essentially. S is safe, M is mécanique, that's full auto, and C is coup par coup, or shot by shot, or semi-auto. So these are guns that are capable of, well, selective fire, either semi or full. Again, my experience in the field is that you are much better off using this in semi-auto than in full. You do get a bipod on the Chauchat. It is too tall, floppy, and really irritating to try to use. But it is there, so you got a bipod. That's all you can really say for it. All right, in order to disassemble this, we're going to start by making sure the bolt is forward, so the spring is uncompressed. Then we're going to come to the rear end cap of the gun. There's a little catch here. I hold that down and it allows me to unscrew this rear cap on the receiver tube. Then the springs come out. So there's our guide rod, and we have an internal spring and an external spring. This is so that we have one spring operating, pushing on the bolt, and one spring pushing on the barrel, because this is a long recoil gun, which means the bolt and barrel are locked together through the entire length of recoil until they lock back. Then the bolt stays in place backward, the barrel reciprocates forward. Once the barrel is all the way forward, then the bolt is released to go forward to pick up another cartridge. Now fundamentally, the design of the Chauchat is a combination of a very simple sheet steel lower assembly with a tubular upper assembly, and they're held together by two things. One is a pin in the back, and the other is this clamp in the front. So I'm going to take this lever and rotate it 90 degrees down, and that will release the front. Then I'm going to come to the back of the gun. This pin you're supposed to be able to pull through and then push this tab down to sort of lock it in place, but this tab doesn't want to go down, so I'm just going to pull it out the side like that. This is a retained pin. Once it's lifted out, now I have to pull the charging handle back because I need this bar to come out. This piece is attached to the upper. That is there in the lower. This is camming the feed ramp. And there we go. So there's the lower assembly. We've got our trigger right there. We've got our magazine catch right there. And then we have a feed ramp here, and this is cammed up and down by the passage of this rod under this plate. So that's a little complicated to show you, but essentially when the bolt's going forward, chambering around, it lifts this up so that the round will feed, and then when then it drops down when no longer needed. In the upper assembly, I'm going to pull this back to this point where the slot on the bottom here widens out, and I can lift off this piece. This lug is running in that hole in the bolt. You can see the cam track here. That's what raises and lowers the feed ramp. This is the cartridge pusher. That's what's actually pushing around out of the magazine up the feed ramp into the chamber, and that of course is the charging handle. Now we can pull some more bits out of the gun. I think it shows this best if I pull the whole internal tube out. So you can actually see the cooling jacket on the barrel here. We're going to pull this all out the back of the gun. All right, so here's the barrel jacket, the flash hider up there, the front sight, the receiver tube. This is the barrel up here. It's actually a relatively short barrel. We have our barrel extension here, and then we actually have the bolt assembly running inside, and then this is the bolt and bolt carrier. And fundamentally, this is a two-lug rotating bolt to fire. So on the French version, basically it's all the same except the bolt face is a little bit wider to accommodate the large rim of the 8mm Lebel cartridge case. I mentioned this aluminum barrel jacket before. Note that it is actually serialized to the gun, which is really cool. This is separate. It's attached to the barrel, but it's not fixed to the barrel, and it's not part of the barrel, and it's made out of aluminum. And it is intended just to sink heat off the barrel, and then it's got these ribs so that it can, in theory, disperse the heat as quickly as possible, get it out of the gun, keep the gun cool. It sort of worked. It works for a couple hundred rounds, and then the tubes start expanding at different rates, and the gun will seize up eventually if you shoot too much out of it. So there you go. There is the American model of 1918 30-06 caliber Chauchat field stripped. There's really not that much to it. The parts are all really big. It is full of sharp edges, and it will very happily cut you and slam thumbs and such. It is an advanced level gun to use, but it's really not as bad in some ways as its reputation makes out. But it is as bad in other ways. So let's talk about what ended up happening with these. So American troops were issued their French small arms when they got to France, and problems fairly quickly showed up with the 1918 Chauchats. The problems were largely with extraction. So when the guns got hot, cases just wouldn't extract, and that's a big problem. Like, you need them to. Now, these guns were being tested at the factory, but the factory test was 24 rounds per gun to make sure they worked, and that's not enough to get them hot to any substantial degree. Now, problems were being found at the factory. There was allegedly a 40% reject rate on these guns at Gladiator. I mean, they were cranking these things out fast, and just to put it in perspective, 40% is really bad, but it's not like that much worse than a lot of other wartime production projects that you see in World War I and World War II. Germans had like a 30% reject rate of Sturmgewehr 44 receivers. The Russians had huge reject rates on a bunch of their World War II production. So it's not hugely surprising that there would be a lot of guns rejected for quality control. It's actually kind of a good thing that they were caught. But of course, instead of trying to find the core problem and fix it, the focus was on finishing the production as quickly as possible because guns are needed in the field. And so underlying problems that were able to pass that 24-round check would then emerge later in the field. And what appears, like what we know today from researchers investigating this, is that the chambers were cut wrong, and we don't know why. Whether it was a mistake on the blueprints, or bad tooling, or hypothetically even some sort of German sabotage, for all we know. But the chambers were cut a little too short. The cutout in the barrel for the extractor was a little too small. And again, when the guns got hot, they just wouldn't extract well. So a lot of the surviving examples have actually had the chambers just touched up with a reamer and run well. I actually have one myself that runs really surprisingly well. And I have not fired this one, but I am told that it also runs quite well now. Because there wasn't anything fundamental about these guns that made them not work. These guns have a poor reputation because they are very difficult guns to shoot well. There is an experience of shooting a Chauchat that is really unlike any other machine gun out there, and it's something you have to experience, and it takes a lot of practice to get good with them. And today, nobody does. Like, nobody has actually been really good at shooting a Chauchat since probably about 1927, which is when the Belgians finally got rid of theirs, and I think they were the last country effectively actually fielding the Chauchat. So in the field for the US in World War I, these problems were too severe for guys to apparently be very confident taking the 30-06 guns into combat. And it appears, although there's very little documentation about this, that units would train with the 30-06 guns, but when they actually rotated up to the front, they got issued 8mm Lebel Chauchats, French caliber Chauchats. In total, the US would acquire 18,004 of these guys, and just under 16,000, 15,998 apparently, of the French caliber guns. These are found as battlefield relics. You find magazines, you'll find the guns dug up on battlefields. So they did see combat service, but it seems that whenever possible, they were kept in the rear for training, and the French caliber ones, which were more reliable, they didn't have these chamber issues. Those were the ones that were actually sent forward for fighting. As for the guns in combat, they have a mixed reputation. I have a whole video on the French caliber Chauchat. It would be a bit long probably to get into the reputational issues versus the reality here in today's video. Suffice to say, there were a lot of doughboys who came home very happy to have had their Chauchats because they offered a level of firepower far beyond what was possible to have in a bolt-action rifle. There are also plenty of doughboys who came home really annoyed at their Chauchats for having given them problems in the field, and probably a decent number who didn't come home because the Chauchats didn't work when they needed to. So it is a mixed bag. There's a reputation there. Some it's based on reality, some of it's exaggeration. The only way to really find out for yourself how these are to shoot is to get one and shoot it yourself. And we're at Morphy's, so this is going somewhere with somebody. Hopefully it goes to someone who appreciates it. I think these are criminally underappreciated as an element of true American military history. Like the American Expeditionary Force went over the pond to France, and these are the guns that they took into combat with them. These and the French caliber ones. So I think they have a place in any proper U.S. Marshall collection. Anyway, now I'm totally rambling because it's a French gun and it's also an American military gun, and I really like them, and I'm clearly biased. So big thanks to Morphy's for giving me access to this one to ramble on and wax poetic about. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.